Josh. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Megan?
Oh, I'm good. It's so good to see you. Thank you for hopping on in time for the little networking bit we hope people will join us for.
Yeah, that should be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's so nice to get to see you face to face. Man, I'm
Right?
I'm so glad that you reached out and connected and we were able to grab you. I'm so excited. I was just bragging to our board. I was like, this just fell into our lap. I mean, this guy just reached out and his creds are off the chart. And I'm just so excited that he's going to be able to speak with us. I hope you don't mind. We grabbed one of your images of you looking all like panel official and put it on the
Yeah.
I said the image we found, it was owned by your digital agency, so I was like, I'm sure he won't mind. It's fine.
No,
So
not
yeah,
at all.
yeah, yeah. Well, how are you? How are things in Virginia? Is that where you're located today?
Yeah. Things are good. Things are good. The kids are outside on the swing set.
Awesome.
We're 15 miles outside of DC, so the craziness hasn't really impacted us too directly. So all is good. How about you?
Good. No, just things are good here. In based in Waco, Texas, as you know, been working from home like the rest of Neighborly
Uh,
since the middle of March. My son is in daycare, and
uh-huh.
God bless them, they're still open. So I know. So we're glad that he's there. They're doing a really good job being safe, screening temperatures before you go in the building, just all kinds of stuff. So
Oh, great.
we're really fortunate. But is that Marlene Neal? Hey, lady. Let's see. Let's do a quick audio check. Having some trouble hearing you. Not very loud. Yeah. Just sounds like some feedback maybe on that. Let's try again.
Testing.
Uh-oh. Huh. Well, let's see. Let's use this as a quick test because I want to make sure nobody else has any audio trouble coming on. Let's see. Tell you what, do. Why don't you kill the phone and try to join from audio? I bet what's happening is your phone is interfering audio right there on the computer. So did you kill your cell phone, Marlene? Did you kill your cell phone? Join see if that'll work. I'm resuming recording. Okay. Well, before we kind of dive in too deep too, we had a little bit of some audio issues before. I just want to make sure everyone that is on, and as people join, thumbs up. Are y'all still good as far as hearing each other? Okay. Looks like we're great. And I see that Josh has got his first slide up there. Everyone can see that, what he's sharing. Good to go. Good. Well, guys, I just want to say thank you so much. It's really good to see all your faces. It's, you Zoom, like we said, we Zoom calls a lot, but it is a little bit lonely. It's nice to kind of feel like we're connected. Welcome to the June official Central Texas PRSA meeting. This is our second attempt at a virtual meeting. We were actually able to partner with our Southwest PRSA district, who had organized an amazing APR panel celebrating April APR month. And I thought it was really, really well done. And so that was kind of our first dip our toe, if you will, into events as a chapter, with this new normal, this new virtual, and it went really well. It went really well. And so it kind of helped boost both myself as well as the board's confidence for our chapter that we might be able to try something like this. So when Josh, reached out to us as a speaker and offered that he'd be willing to visit our chapter virtually, we decided, yeah, this sounds like a great opportunity. So we're very excited. It's difficult. These are unprecedented times. And so we want to make sure, as a chapter and the board not to speak for all of us, but we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to stay connected to the members and to help facilitate making the resources that we all already count on for PRSA to continue to be available, even in the new normal that we are and not being able to interact in person. So that being said, I just wanted to mention that we just had to make the very difficult decision, or I did, speaking with PRSA at this time, piece of chapter business. We're going to be suspending in-person events, in-person meetings until August 1st at this time, right? So we had to kind of do that over the summer, and now pushing that back to the beginning of August. And at that time, I, as well as the board, will discuss, what are the current best practices and recommendations. We'll just reevaluate, what is the smartest thing that we can do moving forward. And it's my hope that we'll be able to, resume gathering then, if not shortly afterwards. But that's kind of what we're looking at right now. So I'm really glad that we have these types of resources, be it Ring Central, be it Zoom, all the different things that we were talking about in our networking before the meeting started of, what's your favorite way to meet virtually, be it Teams or GoToMeeting, is what Josh said that his agency uses. So that being said, thank you guys again for joining us. One quick shout out to, just want to mention that Andrea's been doing a great job trying to keep messages, trying to keep social media postings active, trying to keep those resources I just mentioned top of mind. Be sure and look in that email today. And I'm saying this for those present as well as for those that may watch the recording afterwards. There's a link that she included in the Evite for today that has a lot of PRSA's culminated resources for both remote working as well as for dealing with any kind of COVID-19 issues that you are helping your organization through at this time. There's a lot of great, both on-demand things, some recorded things, several articles. So however you want to consume that information, there's some really great kind of best practices and things as we as PR practitioners, PR professionals are trying to be that voice of wisdom and reason supporting our leaders in making decisions for what we have to make recommendations for. So make sure you guys take a look at that as well as the other PRSA resources online. If you have any trouble getting into your account, let one of the board members know. I'm sure that we can connect you guys with someone at National that can help you, because that's really where the value of your membership, especially right now, is what all can be provided for that. I say membership, don't forget, during this time when you're working from home, if you are working from home, make sure your membership stays up to date. I know that different companies' fiscal years fall at different times. A lot of different organizations are really having to take a hard look at budgets right now. So I really encourage you to, speak to whomever you need to about making sure that your membership support, if you have it with your employer, stays up to date, because we don't want to lose you. We don't want to lose any of our chapter members. All that to say, thanks for listening to my spiel. I want to introduce the illustrious Josh Greene, who I plan to call JGZ from here on out moving forward in the meeting. So just in case you're curious who I'm talking about, that's who we're referring to. Basically, the reason that we have Josh was a fortuitous crossing of paths. He reached out and just basically said, I've been doing these type of talks for chapters. He had just recently spoke with a PRSA chapter in Richmond. It went well, his presentation virtually, and he said, would you guys be interested? Talked with our board members. Heck yes. Heck yes, we would, because it had been on our hearts to try to get something together, for the month of June, just kicking it off, connecting with our members in the way that we could and providing, continuing to provide something of value. And so just not to brag too much, but, we got the CEO of the Mather Group. Josh Greene is CEO of the Mather Group digital agency, helps company manage their reputation, online especially, which, as we all know, is of even greater importance and value right now. And he just has a long list of accomplishments. Take a look at that Evite to look at all the different things that he's done before now. But really great presentation from Josh that we're looking forward to. And we just want to extend our thanks to him. He is located in Virginia, and that is where he is today, working from his home. But without greater ado, I would like to pass over the invisible microphone to Josh Greene. And first of all, just say thank you from Central Texas PRSA chapter for being with us today.
Well, thanks, Megan, and I appreciate you having me here virtually with you. And hopefully everyone can see the screen, and we'll talk a little bit about managing reputation in times of uncertainty. One of the nice things about this format with the chat and the video is that we can be very interactive. So if you want to dig into a particular company or a situation you might have as we go along, just jump in with questions, or we can do a deeper dive in Q&A at the end, depending on whatever works for everyone. As Megan mentioned, I'm with the Mather Group. We're a digital agency that helps companies manage how they're found online, mainly through search engine optimization, Wikipedia, and some online advertising. We work with everyone from very big companies like Discovery to nonprofits like the Foundation for Alcohol Responsibility to startups like Ybot, which is a Wi-Fi analysis company for campuses and enterprise locations. There are a number of things that people think about when you hear online reputation. And for most people, it's what they see online when they're searching Google and taking a look at your company. You've got everything from paid ads to company web pages to Wikipedia to LinkedIn to Glassdoor and to review sites, which is another increasingly important part of your online reputation these days. There are 4 things I'll sort of dig into and take a look at. We've got Google search results, we've got review sites, we've got corporate Wikipedia pages, and then we also dig into CEO search a little bit. And the first one of these is Google search results. And when you hear people talk about SEO, what they're mainly talking about is sort of the optimizing for content so that they show up at the top of the rankings in Google or whatever other search engine people might have. There's a number of pieces that show up in the typical search results page, which you'll often hear referred to as SERPs. So here we've done a search on a company named Mobomo, an IT company in the Virginia area. And you've got a number of pieces that sort of are defining their reputation in Google. The first is their knowledge panel, which this is Google's way of aggregating information. Oftentimes, the bigger the company, the more information you'll sort of see in the top right side of things when you search on them. The next thing is Google My Business. If you're in a business with a physical location, and this is something I'm sure, Megan, you've heard a lot about at Neighborly, you'll see a Google My Business thing, which as the business owner gives you a lot of control of how you're showing up there, hours of operation, menus if you're a restaurant, products, services, pictures, and given what's going on now, changes in operating hours or what services you offer or something that's getting updated quite a bit.
Such a great point, Josh. Absolutely. For Neighborly, based out of, being franchise owners scattered across the U.S. with different regulations affecting them, that's been one of our big areas to try to keep their potential and existing customers updated on. Are they open? What are they doing? Are they serving? No, you make a great point. And I'm sure for a ton of different ones of your clients across the board as well right now.
Yeah. Then we have the organic search part here, which is the name of the company. And then you see 6 of these site links underneath, which is Google's algorithm sort of guessing what is the most relevant information within that company page for someone who's searching. And then finally, at the top of the page, you have your paid advertising. We'll talk a little bit about brand advertising, but the key thing to note here is this is giving you, in this case, 5 or 6 lines of text saying exactly what you want to say about your business versus the organic results. Google's sort of grabbing information from your website. We'll talk about how to change that, but this ad up here is something that you have complete control over. You'll see a lot of this brand advertising showing up at the top of pages. There's a whole bunch of different rules about bidding on other people's trademarks and things like that. But you can see that sometimes it's people protecting their trademarks. So you have a HelloFresh page here. And then you have Home Chefs sort of trying to run an ad here to take advantage of the brand equity HelloFresh has built up. So you'll oftentimes see a little bit of a tug of war here going on for some of the advertising space at the top of the page. So when we talk about SEO, a lot of times there's a few different factors, and in this case, there are three main factors that are really playing a role in impacting general SEO. There's the content of the page, which is usually the first thing everyone thinks about. There's your site profile or domain authority, and then there are backlinks to your site. So the first thing that's important is just the content of the site. There are a number of key factors that go into how Google's evaluating the content on a site. And Google increasingly rewards well thought out, well focused content on a given page. A lot of times you've heard all about keywords and more keywords, and pretty much everyone in the world has had it beaten into their head at this point that the keywords may be important. Ironically, keywords are now probably less important than any point they've ever been for Google rankings. You can rank on pages even if a keyword never even shows up. Google continues to roll out major system upgrades to improve how they're able to parse language. So it continues to get increasingly harder to sort of game the system the way it might have been 5 or 10 years ago. A lot of times what you're seeing now is that in some ways content has been sort of oversold for SEO. Not in general, having good content is a very, very good thing. But having content as the only way that you're going to rank well in Google has been really a little bit oversold by people who are selling tools to help you make content. The other, or the second of the three pieces is site profile. Basically, the stronger your site is, the better your chances of ranking for any keyword. Invented by Moz, there's a measure called domain authority, which is a scale from 0 to 100. 0 maybe being a brand new site. A lot of nonprofits are in the 30s or 40s, and things like Amazon, the New York Times, or Wikipedia are around 100. So what you see with them is if Amazon has a page about a new product or Wikipedia has a page about a politician, they're almost always going to rank in the top 3, almost regardless of content, because they're given so much authority by Google as such a reputable, authoritative site.
So quick question, Josh, when I introduced you, I didn't realize that you on the side had a hobby of powerlifting.
Yeah.
Is that the most recent competition, or is that from a while back, you know?
Is that pic? Oh yeah, that was recent. That was probably yesterday, I think, that I took that
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Got it. Yeah, just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I shaved off the beard because it was a presentation, and then.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And then this obviously is not a self-portrait, but backlinks are very important to Google. So essentially, every time someone links from their site to your site, it counts as a vote, and some votes are much more important than others. If I get a link from a major newspaper, that counts a lot more than a link from a local blog. They all have different weights. So the more links and the more valuable the links are, the more they play a role in there. If I have 1,000 links from different places, Google is going to assume that's much more valuable content than a page that maybe has 2 links to it from somewhere. And one of the sort of interesting things when we look at source code of the content that's appearing on a website is if you were to do a search on the Mather Group LLC, you'll see this snippet in Google about the Mather Group, where it's got our title, the Mather Group, nice people, great ROI. And then you've got a sentence introducing us that's sort of the Mather Group is a boutique agency and you know, what we specialize in. So the interesting thing about that is if you wanted this to change within Google, there's some source code within a particular, within the main homepage on our site that a lot of times you can change fairly straightforwardly in the back end. This is the meta tags that you've probably heard a lot about. If I change, so the title that I've put in the meta tags for the site is exactly what's showing up in Google. And then the other key one is something called the meta description. And this is the description that's rippling back through Google. About 50 or 60% of the time, Google will just grab this meta description here and put it into their search results. So you can sort of define how you're showing up in Google for that search. One of the things that, is amusing is if I wanted to, impress my kids, I could go in and say it's founded by Josh Greene, who invented Paw Patrol or something like that. And it would be a much more impressive result from their perspective. The other thing that you get to control here is how you're showing up in both the Open Graph and Twitter. So when people share your website, what that does is lets you control the description and the image. If you've ever seen someone share something on Facebook and it just has a bizarre image or it doesn't seem to make any sense, a lot of times that'll be because this, this type of coding and stuff hasn't been set. The good news is for people who use WordPress or a lot of the other popular sites, there are plugins like Yoast that make a lot of this really straightforward, so you don't have to know much in the way of web coding. You just need to know what you want to show up to have work. One of the other things that we just saw in that demonstration was the knowledge graph, which is powering everything over here on the right side. What you're seeing here is the Virginia Department of Transportation. And if you see this claim this knowledge panel down here, that means you as the owner of this site could claim this panel, and that gives you a lot more control over what is showing up here. You can control the profiles that are showing up. You can do a little bit on who the competitors are that are showing up, have a better logo over here. So if it hasn't been claimed, I would encourage you to do it. There's a PDF on our blog about it. It's generally straightforward, except that Google asks for a ton of information to prove that you really own the site. So a lot of times you'll have to submit a business license or a driver's license if you're an actual person to grab this. But generally it's a good thing to claim it so that you have some control over here. The second thing taking a look at is just review sites. If you've ever just heard everyone in the world talking about 5 stars for their review sites, you can just start going down a rabbit hole of review sites. At this point, depending on the field you're in, you have everything from OpenTable and Yelp to House to Facebook to Glassdoor and Trustpilot. And one of the real challenges here is just how you deal with it, because each of them has their own ecosystem in terms of how it's supposed to work. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the best practices that you can use when you're dealing with review sites for your company. There's sort of 2 major pieces of advice we generally give. The first is pretty straightforward. Just doing good work tends to lead to good reviews. And the second thing is just asking for good reviews a lot of times. Depending on what your site you're on, sometimes you're just supposed to organically wait till reviews happen and respond to them, which was sort of Yelp's original model, which is nice, but there's a benefit to making sure that people are aware that in whatever space you're in, whether it's how happy your employees are, in Glassdoor or the food in a restaurant in Yelp, you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance for success, because most of the time people leaving reviews feel strongly one way or another. There aren't a lot of people taking a ton of time to just sort of leave a, well, I didn't have much of an opinion, but I was there type of reviews. So it's interesting. Glassdoor, for example, encourages you to have your employees leave reviews because they want to be the definitive site for employee reviews. Yelp for a long time tried to keep it as a just community-driven site with no interaction. But just as an example of how far and how strange some of the review world has gotten. A lot of times, if you're using an app, you'll get asked to rate it. You know, would you give this app 0 to 5 stars? And it's actually the app programming asking you. So if you give it 5 stars, it'll ask you if you want to go to the official iTunes site to leave a review. If you give 0 to 4 stars, it takes you to their internal website where you can leave a review, which someone may or may not look at, but it'll never get seen publicly because the incentive for the app is just to have 5 stars as many times as possible in the App Store. So there is a lot of gaming the system that goes on. One of the other things that tends to be helpful when you're trying to deal with reviews is you've got the opportunity to flag them. Each site has their own sort of rules for it, but if they're off topic, they're highly biased, they're not relevant, usually there's a flagging review section here. And what we've seen is if you're a user on that platform, or even better, you have a couple of people on that platform, you can flag that and generally have some luck in getting completely irrelevant or biased reviews down, which is useful for your overall rating, especially if you don't have a ton of reviews. It doesn't take too many to improve the stars that you've gotten. We've found there are a number of resources just in terms of dealing with this sort of stuff. Fiverr and Amazon's Mechanical Turk have a lot of services that you can use for review management. And we also have used Upwork quite a bit, not just for reviews, but if you need someone who's world-class in a specific discipline for a couple hours, you can hire someone on an hourly basis. So we've found people who are really experts in things like Google Analytics to help with things on different websites that we've been working on. The third thing on our list is corporate Wikipedia pages. Depending on the size of the company that you have or are working for, it plays a huge role in the search engine results. What you'll see here is over in the knowledge panel on the right, Wikipedia provides the description and an easy link to your page. So whatever the first sentence or two of your Wikipedia page is what's showing up over here. And then also it's usually showing up in the top 3 results over here. So those first 2 lines in Wikipedia are playing a huge role in how you're showing up in Google. And a lot of times we've seen companies who've just never paid attention to it. And because people see it as a sort of impartial source of truth, there's an opportunity to prove it. To improve it. We had a company we were working with whose company name was something like blank company is an accounting company in the Tyson's Dulles, Virginia corridor. Like, it spent the first 2 sentences talking physically about where their location was based, when they really could have said something more interesting, like they were maybe not the world's best accounting firm, but more on what they specialized in. And the other thing with Wikipedia is it just gets a tremendous number of views per day. I think the last time we checked, it was over 390 million. One of the things that also tends to be interesting and people may not be aware of is if you're curious how many views your particular page or any page is getting, you can go to the top of any Wikipedia page and click on View History. And then there's something called page views here, which is really useful because it'll show you any page, how much traffic you're getting over time. So in this case, this is IBM, who's averaging almost 4,000 page views per day. It's also good for looking at category pages. Maybe you're in the cloud computing space and you're curious how many people are looking at that page each day. So if you can go through sort of the history section and then go into page views, you can get a sense for how much traffic particular pages are getting. It's also kind of useful for competitive research as well. In terms of what your page looks like, there are a few factors to just keep an eye out for. This is called the info box over on the right side. If you've got a bunch of data there, that's generally a sign. One of the most common issues we see is just dated information, like number of students or budgets that might be 2 or 3 years old, which is pretty easy to correct and give people the more up-to-date version on the company or organization you're at. Usually you'll see a table of contents with multiple sections as well. Hopefully that's nicely built out and sort of gives people a good table of contents for the information that you have. And this sort of makes for a nice, strong Wikipedia page. Most educational institutions are pretty built out. Bigger companies are. Smaller companies tend to be where you see sort of more holes in the information that's available. One of the other things that gets overlooked sometimes is Wikipedia has a ton of categories that aren't company specific. So for example, there's a page on business process automation. Your company might not have a whole page about that, about yourself, but you can certainly add some of the thought leadership you're doing to a page like this about business automation or whatever your category might be. And then the other thing that is important with Wikipedia is if you don't pay attention to your page, controversy can sort of creep up on you in much the same way. If you don't react to reviews, the people who are feeling the strongest about a particular topic may be the ones who dominate it. A lot of times you'll see very extensive controversy that just keeps going and going, that really ought to be cleaned up. But because someone, at some point put that all in there and no one's done anything, it's sort of lived on, which is unfortunate. At one point I worked for Discovery Communications, obviously a global television cable powerhouse. There had been maybe a decade ago a brief hostage situation in one of their lobbies. It lasted about an hour, no one was hurt, it got resolved, and there was like yay much information, like a full page information on the guy's manifesto and everything, and maybe this much on the $10 billion in revenue that Discovery was doing. So it was just a question of going in and sort of saying, hey, maybe the whole hostage thing should just be its own page or its own section, because it's not really relevant to who the company is as a corporate entity. The other thing that sort of plays into this is the people who believe in a free encyclopedia that's generated by the community, and the number of people who believe in sort of pro-business ideas does not overlap much. So you tend to have a little bit of an anti-corporate bias that tends to creep into Wikipedia pages. And then the fourth of the categories after Wikipedia is CEO search results, and if it's applicable, a Wikipedia page. This may not be as pure of a question in terms of online reputation management, but basically the idea behind it is this is really not the look that you want to get from your CEO when they're asking why you as the corporate communications person has not solved whatever they see as an issue for them. A lot of times, if you just do a search on your CEO, what do you see? If you cringe, that's usually a sign that there's a bit of a problem. If the CEO has a Wikipedia page, are there things that are supposed to be fixed, or have you been getting questions about whether you would, when you're going to set one up for them? Typical search results for a CEO are sort of similar to what you're seeing here: a Wikipedia page, a LinkedIn page. This one's particularly interesting because this is Jeff Bell, CEO of Legal Shield. the perfectly normal Wikipedia page, except he's referred to as a marketing leader in air quotes. I have no idea why it's in air quotes, but I'm pretty sure that whenever he next looks at it, he's probably not going to be thrilled about that. I think he would probably prefer just to be a marketing leader. So you have, sort of weirdness creeping into the search results in different places. Here you have an example of some very positive search results. This is Annie Young Scribner, the CEO of Godiva Chocolate. You've got her top results are profile related. She's the CEO. She's on the board of Yum Brands and Tiffany's. So these are all, very positive results as a first impression. You've got this knowledge panel that's got the link to Wikipedia, and it's got her social media profiles on there. So there's a lot of sort of good positive information that you're seeing. And then when you jump over to the Wikipedia page, you've got a well-written intro. You've got this info box here. One of these sort of unusual or fun things about Wikipedia is there are all these famous people, and when you look at their photos, they look like they're shot with an iPhone or something. The reason for that is Wikipedia is really vigilant about copyright violations. If you try and publish a photo that's appeared anywhere else on the internet, or that appears to be a professional photograph, the Wikipedia bots assume that there are rights issues in terms of who owns the picture, and it gets taken down. So a lot of times you'll see people essentially posed for a candid photo, unless they're maybe a politician with rights-free images that are showing up. One of the other sort of interesting things that a lot of the SEO does, if you're getting good results for someone who's famous, it does have the opportunity to push down negative results, which is oftentimes nice. If you have, one of the most common ones for CEOs is just there are a ton of sites that are devoted to salary and net worth, which are basically scraper sites and sort of annoying and usually inaccurate. But a lot of times we see people sort of concerned about pushing them down, having more information about their business or the charity work they're doing, things like that. If you don't manage them, you can end up with things like this, where this was the CEO of United who, back when people were flying, they had dragged a passenger off of the plane, and whoever had gone through and edited the page had said something about this being a self-immolation of startling proportions, which is a very catchy phrase, but probably not how you want to have your career defined on Wikipedia. Granted, at this point in time, I'm sure he's got much bigger things to worry about, but it's just an example of some of the issues that can crop up there. Yeah, and in this case, they had pulled out, I think, 4 or 5 pull quotes, which seemed a little excessive, right? It was clear this was not a great incident, and at a certain point, it's just overly repetitive and actually is sort of, in some ways, violates some of the Wikipedia rules about neutrality, but you have to pay attention to it in order to be able to call it out. One other thing that's made a big difference for a number of our clients is just the idea of retargeting. When you go to Amazon and look at a watch and it follows you everywhere around the internet that you go, that's retargeting. And the opportunity for a lot of brands is, especially on the B2B side, instead of showing a message once when you come to your website, you can have that message show up 10, 30, 40 times. A lot of times that's for consumer products that you're seeing, lease a car, set up a website, but you can also do the same thing in very specific niches or verticals, especially if you're a small business. It's our experience, especially a small B2B business, you can run campaigns that are reaching everyone who hits your website for $5 to $10 a day, which can make a pretty significant impact. because the people who come to your website are presumably interested and then are seeing you everywhere they go online. And there's a lot of inventory on really well-known sites. People are seeing you on Yahoo or newspaper sites, not because you're advertising directly with those sites, but just because they've happened to have visited your site at some point. So finally, there's a number of pieces of advice in terms of dealing with this. There are a ton of free resources out there for search engine stuff. Moz.com is really, really good. They have a lot of free courses. Wikipedia has a ton of free trainings built into it. Most of the time, the snake oil that everyone's selling you in terms of buy a million links or go to #1 in the rankings is probably not going to work. Google spends a lot of time looking at the same things we do and plugging holes in their algorithm. There's a lot of experimenting you can do, especially as you figure out some of the internal processes of who's going to manage things. So if you know who's in charge of online reputation, that makes it a little bit more easy to manage things. One of the other things is sort of the nature of guidelines versus rules. There tends to be a ton of gray areas in terms of especially the review sites work, as well as Google. You're theoretically not supposed to have any incentive to write a review or to post a review, but at the same time, no one's going to write a review if they're not interested. So that's sort of where the experimenting part comes in to see what your community is interested in doing and how you want to participate in it. And just the last thing is a lot of these things get, and I'm sure this resonates with this group, sometimes good press cures an awful lot of SEO or Wikipedia issues. Good stories do a lot for rankings, for what's showing up in the search engines and in Wikipedia itself. So what I'd be happy to do now is if you have questions about specific companies, about specific topics and how they're showing up in search results, I can sort of show you some of the tools we would use and why things are showing up the way they're showing up, if anyone has any questions on that.
Oh my gosh, before everyone like fights tooth and nail to get their questions out there, I just want to say thank you. What a well thought out and well put together presentation, Josh. We can I can tell, you know, from the slides and the information you shared that you really have put some thought into this. I feel like you're handing out a few of your trade secrets, which we really appreciate too, by the way. So thank you for that. Yeah, and we're right on time. This is perfect timing. Open it up for Q&A. Does anyone want to throw Josh and when I say Josh, I mean Jay Jeezy, a curveball question?
Hey Josh, this is Gary. Are the CEOs mostly public traded companies? Do they dip into the nonprofit world?
They do jump into the nonprofit world. Just about all CEOs will have some sort of presence. If you have someone you want to put in chat or just call out, we can take a look and see what's out there for them.
No, not at this time.
Okay. I would say the bigger the company, the more likely, or the organization, the more likely there will be a CEO specific Wikipedia page. But just about every CEO will have some sort of web presence calling them out as the CEO of whatever that company or organization is if you do a Google search on them.
Okay, thank you.
Meg, I think you had something you wanted to shout out, didn't you?
Not that I remember.
Oh, sorry.
It was Kathy, right? Kathy, you were gonna.
Oh, Kathy, I'm sorry. I misheard. Kathy, was that you?
Yes, I just had a kind of a question about the retargeting. You mentioned, you know, kind of $5 to $10 a day for a small business. And I just wondered, you know, when you're visiting with clients, what kind of a budget you set for someone who might be starting off doing that, and if you do kind of a quarter at a time, or what kind of is that space where they could start to see some of that and feel like they're getting some traction?
Yeah, so both Facebook and Google offer retargeting. Those are the two places I would start with. You can cap any of those platforms at whatever budget a day you would want to. So even companies who are spending $10,000 a month, we've started out at $3 or $5 a day to see how it works. There's no minimum really, except for the fact that like Google or Facebook requires a specific number of visits to a site before they'll start retargeting. It might be 200 visits or it might be 1,000 visits, but you usually can get there pretty quickly. And at that point you can start running. So it's generally a pretty easy hurdle to get over in terms of if you decide you want to do this, you build up the audience, and then Google AdWords will start running. So budget-wise, it often takes more in terms of resources to manage it than the actual ad spend when you're starting out. And then if it's something you're wanting to in-house in-house versus the company is, there are a lot of different options for it. But generally, there's a bunch of training, and both Google and Facebook, as well as some of the other platforms, generally want to make it as easy as possible for you to spend money. So you oftentimes will have an account rep, even if you're just starting, who will help you get it set up. Is that sort of what you were asking?
Yes, thank you.
That's a great question, Kathy. Piggybacking off of what Gary said, if you don't mind, I did have a question, especially when you started bringing up the CEO stuff. I was like, oh man, I never really thought about that before. I guess in my mind, and I'm about to date myself, so bear with me, I think when you hear Wikipedia, back when we were students, it's like, now you can't use Wikipedia as your sources. And I'm sure Marlene's, jumping on the bandwagon there for her students. That's not an academic source. So, you think Wikipedia, that's just immediately what comes to my mind. But, I mean, your pitch on the value, the web space on page 1, just all the results, I think is really captivating. And I guess my question is, do you think, and I know everyone on this call, and I'm asking this for everyone who watches the recording, we all come from different sizes of organizations. Some of us are self-proprietors like Kathy. Some of us are part of a large organization, Gary. Some of us are part of, corporate representing franchise owners, et cetera. So different sizes, different stakeholders. I mean, do you think that we should begin investigating whether our brands, our CEOs, our organization, maybe even looking at some of our owners, do they have those Wikipedia pages? If they don't, how do you go about making that happen? And then just to add one more bundle to make this as hard and complicated of a question laundry list as possible, you mentioned that there's ways that you can call it out on Wikipedia if someone is violating the neutrality implied within that user platform. How do you do that? If you want it, how do you look at getting it? And then if you get it and it goes nutso, how do you go about, quote, calling it out and fixing it? Ready, go. What do you think, Josh?
Yes. So question number 1 is, do you have a Wikipedia page currently? So there's sort of yes, you do, and no, you don't. If you don't, then it's useful to think through what would be the rationale for it, and are you sort of notable enough to have a page? The downside of Wikipedia is that it's a community edited resource, and it's a lot easier for someone to put a negative fact into Wikipedia than it is to try and break into the top 10 of your search rankings. So if you don't have a Wikipedia page, it's worth contemplating why the company wants one, maybe for SEO, maybe for legacy, maybe for a resource for potential investors or franchisees, but there are potential downsides. so it's worth thinking through that. If you want to do it, then theoretically an editor would write a page and submit it through the Wikipedia review process. We do actually an entire webinar on how Wikipedia works, which I'm happy to forward to anyone. I'll just jump to the next slide. It's fairly involved if you are trying to set one up from scratch. It's much easier if you are editing an existing Wikipedia page. And if you already have one, then it becomes a question of essentially managing the Wikipedia page because you're sort of stuck with it. So then the question is, how do you present it as well as possible? The answer to that is essentially any Wikipedia editor can suggest changes to any page. There are about 1 million different asterisks around that whole concept, but oftentimes it's a question of, is someone internally to whatever organization you're in already a Wikipedia editor and or in some way involved with managing your page? Usually companies or organizations that have a page, there tends to be someone who is both aware of it and has tried to figure out some way to deal with it. And usually that's a good starting point.
Got it. I just thought of it, no, especially when you brought up the CEO stuff. I mean, you know, Kim, who's also on this call, we haven't got to introduce her yet, but she's our communications director for Neighborly. I saw her pop on a little bit ago at the beginning of your presentation. I know she's helping spearhead along with one of our agencies, you know, reputation campaign looking at our CEO, just as we've rebranded to be Neighborly from Bar Group, et cetera. So when you mentioned, you know, the CEO aspect of it, I was like, I hadn't even thought of that, and maybe she has, but you know, it caught my attention. It wasn't something I expected you to say, I guess is what I suppose when you mentioned Wikipedia. That's interesting. And then, like you said, it's almost like once you birth the monster, then managing it. How easy is it to kill the monster if you decide, oh my gosh, this Wikipedia thing is not working out for us? What?
Yeah, it is a little bit like Frankenstein's monster in terms of, if you go through, or your page has gone through all the headaches to get set up and been approved and be a live page, it then becomes challenging to kill the page if you don't want one. A lot of times we're doing the reverse, where there's small companies who may not actually justify having one, who would like to get one, versus bigger companies tend to be more in the hand on the forehead, how do I deal with this, you know, now that it's here. But yeah, in terms of agencies, there's usually a lot that they can do in terms of sort of the brand building for a company like Neighborly or a CEO, in terms of speaking tours and press and things like that. Whereas Wikipedia seems to be a world unto itself. So I generally would tend to say, if you don't have a page, there's probably not a huge incentive to get one, unless it's part of, you know, that kind of strategy of you know, brand building, awareness. People are trying to do research about the company.
Gotcha.
And I would probably guess it seems like it might be more likely that some of the sub-brands might have their own page at this point, just because they've been around for a while and are, you know, probably really well known and have had a lot of press. You know, like I know who Mr. Rooter is and Mr. Handyman is. I have no idea who Neighborly is, just as a sort of civilian.
Right. No, I definitely plan the brands that I represent. I plan to, after this call, do a little Google, you know, or ask Jeeves, as one of your memes said. That was, oh, your memes are just fantastic. The memes are my favorite part of this whole deal. But yeah, no, I plan to look and see, you know, for my brands, what's out there. Because honestly, like you said, Wikipedia just has never crossed my mind, you know, when it comes from my brand standpoint, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, John, this is Kim. I didn't turn my video on. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Sorry, I hopped on a few seconds late, but this is very interesting. And like Megan said, you know, the Wikipedia, aspect, I've always viewed that as a negative, just because of our brands and the publicity we do get. So I'm going to explore that and talk about that with our team. As Megan said, I think that would be interesting just to see if it might support and help in some way for our
Yeah,
brand.
let me just, while we're playing around here, I'll just, literally the first one I just punched in was Mr. Rooter, and like the fifth organic result was the Wikipedia page.
Yes.
And this is sort of a stub because there's very little information. And what, is sort of funny is there's been this flag on it since 2009 that you actually could use for more citations. And if I click on view history here, I'm assuming that, there's maybe been 2 or 3 edits over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I realize this looks like gobbledygook, but what this tells me is very few people have been actively trying to do anything with the Mr. Rooter page. And then I suspect if I click on page views, though, there's 20 or 12 to 20 visits a day. So some number of people are coming here. And not to sort of derail us into a discussion of SEO, but if you look at Mr. Rooter, you've got 1 organic result, and then the number 4 result is down here.
Oh, wow. Page 1. Look at that.
Well, it's page 1, and if you did a little bit more content, it would probably be number 2 or number 3, which would push down this lousy Mr. Rooter Consumer Affairs result a little bit.
Right.
And then, like, we do a lot of this stuff. Like, you could theoretically boost the official Neighborly Brands page and Mr. Rooter Wikipedia page up here, which would sort of push down a little bit the review sites and get a little bit more information up towards the positive side of things.
Right, which is what we're always looking to do, especially for Mr. Rooter sometimes.
Right. No,
Right,
well said,
right.
Kim. Yeah.
Definitely wrote notes on this. We may reach out to you.
Yeah.
Josh, would you show me again where the page views are on the Wikipedia page? I'm
Yes.
having trouble finding it.
So if you click on view history in the top right for any page,
Uh-huh.
and then you go down about 3 inches to page views. Are you on, can you see my
I'm
screen?
on Mr. Rooter.
What's that?
That I'm on the Mr. Rooter page.
Okay, so you clicked on Mr. View History?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm where you are.
Okay, and then if you come down here under this box that says filter revisions,
Mm-hmm.
there's one of the choices across the line that says external tools is
Ah,
page.
okay. Gotcha. No wonder I couldn't find it.
Yeah. And
Thanks.
if you ever want to spend a whole lot of time thinking about who edited a page, you can click on page statistics there, and it'll show you like editors and how much of the page they've edited and how often.
And how do you get to be an editor of a page? Can anybody do that, or you have to sign in, or?
Anybody can edit a page at any time is the Wikipedia rule.
Mhm.
There are then a lot of asterisks. A lot of times things you might try and edit might get reverted right away, or other editors will undo them. But yes, theoretically, right now we could just click on edit and start editing the Mr. Rooter page if we wanted to. I would.
Okay, so when I do that, it says you are not logged in.
Right.
So you have to have some kind of account.
You actually don't. You can edit specifically without an account, just with an IP address, which is designed mostly to help people in countries where editing public information could cause them significant issues based on the government. So a lot of times you'll see people just editing from IP addresses on really sensitive topics because they don't have an account. So you actually don't need an account. You could just start editing right now.
Okay.
And depending how familiar you are, it might or might not work.
I'm on the board of a little nonprofit, and they misspelled my name.
You know, in general,
It actually has my name on it, but it's not spelled right.
so it's interesting. Either the more obscure or the more absolute a fact is, the better your luck is likely to be. The challenge is you're not supposed to edit pages you're involved with, which is annoying because no one has come along and corrected your name. But you end up in all sorts of weird rabbit holes. You're also supposed to have public citations of stuff. So I've had HR people from very big companies not being able to update their number of employees just because it's not published anywhere, despite the fact they know the number because they work there.
Interesting.
That is so. So after this call, one of us will get with you and we'll go fix your name for you since we're not on that.
Yeah, I know. I was gonna say, just put it in chat and we'll fix it.
We got your back. Well, I am looking really quick, guys. At the time, would you mind, Josh, one more time flashing your exactly? You read my mind. Just in case you guys want to take a quick screenshot. I know I had a little laundry list of other questions I might follow up with Josh myself, just random thinkings and thoughts. I've grabbed a screenshot of his contact info with his lovely mug there right now. I really like the weightlifter better, but I'll go with this headshot with your polo. That's fine. But no, I wanted to wrap up and kind of respect everyone's lunch hour. I had a couple notes just in closing. A couple of you guys hopped on after I mentioned this, and I'm just going to reiterate this again for any audience members that view after, that we're going to hopefully send our recording out. We went ahead after networking was over and began recording this presentation to capture both our chapter business, just a few items that we listed off with at the beginning, as well as the totality of Josh's presentation on managing your reputation during uncertain times, which what could be better than right now? Our lives are lived online and through web right now. So I just really appreciate the information you shared, Josh. So we'll figure out the best way to do that. That's basically me asking Andrea, our amazing secretary of second year, to do more work for us, but we'll figure out the best way that we can get that out to everybody. And I do want to point out again, like I mentioned at the beginning of our meeting, that in the message that Andrea did put out regarding this event, she included a link to PRSA National's resources to help support you during this time, whatever it is that you're advising or leading or challenging your organization to do during working from home, during COVID-19 issues, whatever. A lot of those resources are included with your PRSA membership at that link. It's kind of a curated spot landing page for that. So I really encourage you guys to look at that. I've used it for some of the stuff with my brands that I've helped with. And I guess finally, basically, I just want to thank you guys for being here, for being a part of this, for looking at it. One last mention, I know different organizations have different times for fiscal years. I mentioned this at the beginning. Make sure as they evaluate budgets moving forward, if possible, that you put a plug in for keeping your membership up to date, because I know that our employer helps us with that as members, and that means a lot to us. So just make sure that stays on your radar, since things are a little bit different than usual with working from home for a lot of us. Again, I just really thank you guys for being here for the June Central Texas PRSA virtual meeting and event. I thought this was really great, and it was great networking with you guys. Andrea mentioned at the bottom of her email that she put all of the contact information for each of the board members. Please feel free to reach out to us if there's something we can help you with, or if you just want to vent about work from home and GoToMeeting making your head look big, or whatever. Just reach out to us if there's anything that we can do. Josh, thanks again. We really appreciate you being a part of today's meeting, and being the bane and the meat of today's meeting, really. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Guys, I guess that's pretty much it. I guess we'll go ahead and wave bye, but I'll go ahead and end the recording here in about a minute or two. Okay. Great to see you guys. Y'all stay well, stay healthy.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Let me know if you have any questions.